Hello there, and welcome to another episode here on the Strong by Design podcast. That's right, you're made in God's image to have a strong body, mind, and spirit. And today's conversation will absolutely incorporate all three areas of our existence, our life here, body, mind, and spirit for sure, because of where we're going to be going in today's discussion with our very special guest and soon to be a co-host here on the Strong by Design podcast because of her brilliance, her ability to speak so very well, so clearly, and so powerfully. So excited to have our guest Jo Miller on the show a second time. But before we get to her amazing and traumatic experience some years ago and her fight to come back to, excellent health. I wanted to first, of course, take a quick minute and just say thank you to our listeners. If you're new to the Strong by Design podcast, I thank you so much for finding us. Our show has actually really taken off especially well in the last, really since the start of the new year of 2022. We have been exceeding and getting brand new records like on a monthly basis with downloads and followership. So that's great. Maybe it's the new year, maybe it's the topics, maybe it's the guests. Maybe, I don't know what it is, something in the atmosphere and the universe is bringing more listeners to our show. But we're so thankful for it because we just love it. It's our way to give back and to minister to all of the amazing people who maybe have been following Critical Bench for a long time or just really need some powerful conversations, some inspirational voices, some comeback type stories, some health and fitness related tips and lifestyle enhancements, things that will improve people's lives. That's what we're here. That's what the show is all about, to help you live a life that is truly strong by design. And it's not just one dimensional, right? So thank you so much for finding our show, and to our return listeners, you're amazing. Thank you so much. We appreciate every single one of you, and every download matters to us. So our special guest, return guest, Jo Miller, is back on Strong by Design. Jo, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for not banning me from the show.
Oh, right. Because your first episode, you were awesome. Like your story, and your relationship with your twin. If you haven't, listeners, go back just like a month and a half to episode, I think it was it 216 or 217? I'll look real quick while we're talking. It was episode 217, actually. So not that many episodes ago, Jo talked about her very special relationship with her identical twin sister. So please go back and listen to that heartfelt conversation with Jo. But today's conversation, very different, going in a different direction, talking about a terrible what could have been a tragic accident, obviously, that happened some years ago. And we really want to kind of dive in deep to everything she endured and how she fought back to where she is now. But before we get there, Jo, would you just give the listeners just a little taste of who Jo Miller is for just a minute or so, and just share with them, who you are, what you're doing in the world, and what you're doing as part of our team?
Yes, definitely. My name is Jo Miller, or as some call me, Killer Miller, or Jo Animal, on Instagram. I've been working as a personal trainer, nutritionist, sports performance coach, softball coach, and advisor for Believe Big for many, many years. I've been in the health and fitness industry for over 15 years. And growing up, as I mentioned in the last episode, played a ton of sports with my twin sister. 3 sports in high school, softball in college, martial arts since the age of 8, many different styles. And I just eat, sleep, and breathe all things health and fitness.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. That's exactly what drew us to you in terms of when you would first reach out to us towards the latter part of last year as an interested candidate to be a content person for us. And I read your email message and was absolutely blown away. I mean, once I read it, there was nobody else that was even an option anymore, and so we went all in on Jo, and she's been wonderful for the last several months as part of our team and really helping us in a really big way, and we want to grow her as much as she'll let us to be, a bigger player and part of our team, just because of her many talents and her, her wisdom and knowledge in the areas of health and fitness, which are fantastic. So, why we're talking today, though, when I first read your email all those months ago, you had alluded to this moment in your life, and it's something obviously that we've talked about a couple of different times, and thought, okay, well, this would be obviously very powerful to talk on the show about. There's been a lot of people who've been impacted from a major accident, directly or indirectly, themselves or family members. But sometimes people don't really recover very well from these moments in time. Mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, right? There's a lot of different ways that we need to be able to come back from when we feel like, we're on the brink of death. And so if you would, I'd love to obviously paint the picture a little bit for our listenership. Prior to your accident, what was life like for you? Like, how were things going right up until that moment?
At the time, I was in college, kind of finishing up my college career with my identical twin sister. We went to Towson University. We were roommates, same major, and had all the same classes, played softball, but softball had come to a close, and being fit at that time came pretty easily to me. As a kid, I had to work pretty hard for it, and if you listen to that last episode, you'll hear more about that. But in college, at that point, it was more coasting. I felt like I could eat whatever I wanted. The sports that I played just kept me in great shape. So I took my health for granted. I didn't realize how good I had it, although I also didn't realize how much better it could get until that one fateful day, which I'll share about shortly. But like I said before, I played 3 varsity sports in high school, softball in college, martial arts since the age of 8, and my nutrition habits were really unhealthy because I never really thought I saw a side effect. I felt like I was still playing at a high level, lots of energy, so I thought I felt good, but I was eating Cinnabons for breakfast and drinking soda, ate a ton of fast food. It just didn't seem to affect me. And in college, had a great experience, was really blessed, especially having my twin sister there with me through everything. And we were blessed with a number of great friends and involved with a number of different Christian groups. But while a lot seemed like it was going well, I also felt lost. I was studying exercise science and communications, but I didn't actually know what I was going to do with an exercise science degree. I kept going back and forth, and I remember even before starting college, my first day after graduating high school, having nightmares over what am I going to do with my life? How am I going to support myself? I have no idea. And I didn't want to do something where I was going to dread it every day. I had seen so many people just hate going to work and living for the weekend. So I didn't know what I was going to do with that, and I felt kind of lost, and I just felt like I was going through the motions. I was blessed with amazing teachers, and school was going generally well, but again, just that wandering feeling, having no idea about the future. So that's kind of the lead up to the day of the accident.
Yeah. So obviously a pivotal moment. In many ways, you were kind of at a stage of life where many of us have been, when we kind of don't know where we're going, what the future looks like, what we really want to do, what we feel our purpose is, or where we're most passionate, right? It's like there's a lot of things happening in those early 20s, and I think there's only like a select group of young men and women in those late teen years that really attach themselves to something, maybe a trade of some kind. And so, or they're into ministry or into some mission in life. But that's a very small percentage. I think so many of us kind of flounder around in those early 20s, right? I know I did. I knew I loved health and fitness, but I was learning and I was pretty green, but I was around some really smart, people, which was very fortunate, who really kept me on track. I could have gone massively off the rails if it wasn't for the company that I kept for the most part. So that played a huge role. So, okay, so this is leading right up to this day. So we kind of have an idea of who Joe is at this stage. So bring us back to that moment, to that day, as descriptive and as honest and open as you can be about it.
Well, the day of the accident, it ended up being Labor Day weekend, and it was on a Saturday, and the weather started off pretty nice, but later on it began raining. And that day, I actually was working at a gym near the school, and I didn't know I was going to ultimately work in a gym and work in the fitness industry, but I just knew that I had an interest there. And I was working the front desk, and I believe I worked an 8 or 12-hour shift that day. I think it was 12 hours. And then at the end of that day, I went over to the home of a family that went to the Taekwondo school that my husband and I went to at the time. We were dating, and we went to the school, and these parents came up to me and asked if I would watch their 3 children, if I could babysit. And I love kids, so I was all over that. And they were so adorable. How could I say no? So after that 12-hour shift, I went to their house, and I saw those 3 little angels, and I was excited to spend the evening with them, and the parents left. And then it was like something out of a sitcom, because something changed in the kids, and they started running all kinds of crazy antics, going all over the house, out of the house, climbing on top of furniture that I thought was going to tip over and crush them or break stuff. They were climbing up on top of the countertops, and I had something cooking on the stove, and the 3-year-old ran across the countertops and almost onto the stovetop. And so I'm running, I pick up the kid, carefully put them down, and then when I look over my shoulder, the other kid standing on the dining room table, and I thought, am I being punked here? I don't know what's happening.
Right.
And there was a little one, a baby, and I'm drenched in sweat. And then I fed the kids, but then they started flinging food all over the house and at each other, and the house was immaculate. And I thought, these parents are going to think I'm the worst sitter ever. How is this happening? I've never experienced this. And I had babysat kids for many years, usually with my twin sister, but this time I was flying solo for the evening. So after a 12-hour shift and then watching the kids for many hours, the parents get home and they walk in the door, and I was embarrassed because I was drenched in sweat, and I thought, you don't normally find a sitter like that.
Right.
And they looked at me and said, wow, you're the first sitter to not rush out of the house in tears. We've never had that before. And they said, we'll have to use you again. I just was stunned. I didn't know what to think. And I was hungry and super tired. I was frazzled. I don't like confrontation, so I didn't really say a whole lot. And I just carefully and quietly walked out and said goodbye. And I got in my car and I thought, I cannot wait to go home. So I got in the car, and this is where I've definitely learned, if your emotions aren't in check, don't drive. Have somebody else drive, or take a few minutes, kind of get collected, but I didn't. And so I started driving quickly, and I was in the middle of nowhere in Carroll County, Maryland, where it was basically the roads were mostly gravel before I got to a main road where I could see. But I hadn't even gotten to a main road when all of a sudden this curve came up that I wasn't familiar with, this area, a sharp curve, and it had been raining but stopped. And so I didn't realize that the ground was still so wet, and I hit a patch of water and I hydroplaned, and I spun out of control and slammed into a cement bridge. And at that point, I felt this loud boom just going through my entire body, and everything went completely dark. I couldn't see where I was. I couldn't even tell where I was. I started feeling around the car after it happened, and nothing felt where it should be. Everything was in a different place than you would expect. And I remember thinking, I don't know what I hit. I don't know what happened, but that was really bad, and I need to get out of this car quickly, because I would see in the movies there'd be a crash and then a car would explode. So I actually rushed out of the car thinking the car was going to catch on fire. It was that bad. So I quickly got out of the car the best I could, even though everything was so mangled and I couldn't tell where anything was. And then I tried reaching for where my cell phone was, the old flip phones at the time, and I couldn't find it. I couldn't find anything. I couldn't see anything. And then I realized my body is completely wet, but it wasn't rain, it was blood. And I was drenched in blood. I had shards of glass all over my body, cuts and bruises, lacerations, lumps from what I could feel. But what felt really strange was my head. And I felt like if I didn't continue holding on to my ear, it was going to come off completely. So I felt it dangling, and my body was shaking violently, and I thought, okay, I need to get help. I don't know what's happening, but this is really bad. And so I'm hobbling down the road, but there is no sign of life anywhere. I couldn't see a house, a street light, car lights, nothing, completely black. And so I'm walking along, I think I'm on a road, I can barely tell, I'm so out of it. And I realized if somebody doesn't find me, I don't think this is going to end well. So I started praying and asking God for a miracle. And the next minute, it's out of nowhere, a car starts coming down the road. And I thought, oh, thank you, Jesus, a car is coming. Somebody's going to help me. I started flailing my arm, the one arm in the air. I didn't want to let go of my ear because I thought it was just going to fall to the ground and I'd lose it. And I started flailing around, and they drove right past me. And I thought, oh no, either they didn't see me or I look like something out of a horror movie. And who would stop for that? That probably scared them. And so at that point, I actually did start to cry because I thought, this is it. I think this is how it all ends. But then I noticed they turned around and they came back. And so I'm thanking God profusely. And then next thing I know, they call 911 and an ambulance came out, and all these medics are checking me out. They actually had to cut my clothing and I guess they put others, maybe a gown on or something. I couldn't really remember. They were asking me questions, my name, if I knew anyone in the area. I couldn't answer a single question. I'd say, I know this one. I know this answer. I really do. But nothing would come to my mind, and they said I was just in extreme shock. And then they drove me to a field where a helicopter came, and they picked me up, put me in the helicopter to fly me to shock trauma. Now, I couldn't remember anything, but the only thing that I could remember was actually Christian hymns. So I started singing hymns to myself in the helicopter to kind of keep me calm and stay with it until they got me to the University of Maryland Shock Trauma Center in Baltimore. So then once I arrived there, they did immediate surgery to reattach my ear. I had more than 60 stitches on my face and head. They sewed me all up. I had all these cuts and bruises, abrasions, everything all over. And when I woke up in the bed sometime later, I looked down at my leg and I asked them, why did you paint my leg? And they said, "What are you talking about?" And I said, "It looks like you've painted black paint all over my leg." It was completely covered on my right leg. It was just that I was so badly bruised. The bruising just covered my entire leg. And I remember the nurses saying, "We should probably call somebody and let your family know what's happening." And at that point, I was starting to get a little more clear-headed, so I was able to have them call my twin sister. But as I started to tell her where I was and what happened, it was so painful to be able to describe that. I was so concerned about her worrying that I asked the nurse if she could just say, "I'm okay, I'm doing well, I'm fine," and just have them come when they're able. So they finished that phone call, and then they did a bunch of scans, CAT scans on my body and head, and I sustained a bunch of spinal injuries, which would later impact my health, really, even till now, many, many years, more than 15 years later, I still have a lot of back problems, hip problems related to the accident. And then after that, I remember my twin sister and then my husband, who was my boyfriend at the time, Matt, and my Uncle Lloyd, they came and visited me in the hospital sometime in the middle of the night. And then my twin sister, she actually slept in the bed with me until I was released. I think they had a separate bed, and she crawled out of it and crawled in still next to me so that she could be even closer. So then after that, they gave me a cane, and later on I had a bunch of stitches removed. And when I went back to shock trauma, where I had to get the stitches removed, I saw some of the patients that were there the night of my accident, and I just kept thinking, wow, it's amazing I'm alive. They said if I had been an inch taller, the roof of my car would have gone through my skull. And there were so many ways that I could have died. They said that if they hadn't gotten me when they did, I would have bled to death. And so I just felt like, wow, I'm here for a reason. God spared me. And I felt like I had a second chance at life and that I was living on borrowed time. And so at first I felt that intense gratitude, but then I realized, oh wow, now I have a long journey ahead with a pretty bad limp, a cane, and dealing with all the injuries that followed, and even the PTSD that followed from the accident. Even to this day, I have a difficult time in the car, and certain things have never been quite the same.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I can imagine. So it sounds like, within a 24-hour period of the accident, you realized the severity of it, obviously, as the shock of the initial impact and being by yourself in the darkness at night and alone, and thank God for somebody driving past. Literally a gift. You could have just been wandering in the darkness and been losing blood and then passed out, and then
exactly.
That's unbelievable. So what would you say in those first several weeks, first few months, what were the hardest parts of your recovery when it came to, the physical recovery, the mental recovery, emotional recovery, like all those different ways that we need to heal from something like this?
Let's see. Well, I guess physically, to start off with, that was the most noticeable at first. Yeah. That I remember going home, and my twin sister and I, we were living together in an apartment, and while they stitched me up, they didn't clean my hair and all the blood and the glass and all that stuff. So she was trying to help wash it out of my hair, and she actually started to cry, and she called Matt, my boyfriend, and said, "Do you think you could come over and help with this? It's so painful to see her just so bloody and cut up and all the bruises and everything." She didn't want me to be worried by her reaction. But it's with that twin thing, when you see your twin going through something, you feel like you're seeing yourself go through it. Plus, you never want to see a loved one suffering like that and going through so much pain. So he came over and he helped get all that stuff out of my hair. And then I was in college and had classes where I actually missed a number of classes because of the accident and just being in the hospital. And I was so out of it that I didn't get back to professors, although they were gracious about it, but I ended up having to withdraw from a bunch of classes. So I lost out on time and the expense of having to retake some classes. And that part was difficult. And then getting around campus was really challenging because I could barely move. But thankfully at the time, Matt, he would drive me around to my classes. I even had one of my elective classes, surprisingly, was a ballroom dancing class that I needed credit for. And he actually dropped me off at class one time, and the teacher saw him. And the class, you were either a PE major or some sort of health and fitness major if you took it, or really into dance. So it definitely catered more towards a lot of females in the class. And when the teacher saw him, she said, "You're a male. You're sitting there reading a book. You're going to come and join the class." So he ended up taking the class with me the rest of the semester.
What? He was a student there as well?
Not on purpose. He was off at that time. He didn't have class. So he just said, "Here, I'll sit here and read a book while you take your class." And then the teacher roped him into it. So I felt bad about that, but it was fun. And I enjoyed having him there.
So your accident forced your boyfriend at the time, now husband, to learn ballroom dancing with his bride.
Exactly. Maybe that might have been the most traumatic thing for him. No.
For him, right? No. Poor guy.
No. It was a lot of fun, but very hard to get around. I got really physically just out of shape. I rapidly gained 50 to 60 pounds very quickly. I was on some medicine that definitely played a part in that. But also, before, I was so active, and then just going back to eating the way that I used to, and then not being active and just kind of sitting all day long. And I think even the trauma may have affected my metabolism, because from that point on, my metabolism was never the same. I felt like if I thought about a donut, I gained weight. And then standing next to my identical twin sister, we looked like a before and after advertisement. And that was hard too, because people do like to compare twins, especially identical twins. And so I felt really strange not looking the same anymore. My clothes couldn't fit. And then I just was super tired all the time. I started getting tons of headaches. And then I realized all those amazing physical abilities that God had given me and had given me the grace to train for to get to that point were then gone. I could barely do a push-up. I bought a bar to do pull-ups, couldn't even do a pull-up. I almost took the bar back. I was so upset, and I just struggled a lot with my confidence, and my confidence was at an all-time low. And it was depressing. All the things that brought me joy, being outside, being active, I actually couldn't do. And then missing out on classes and not being there with my twin, that then shifted our schedules. So then I couldn't be with her as much, which was very, very painful. And I ended up losing my job too at that time, because they said, "I'm sorry, but you were gone and we had to fill your spot." So I can see the situation there, but again, also hard. And my car was totaled, understandably. Actually, Matt took me to go see my car. There were a couple items that we were able to salvage from the accident, and we just wanted to see what did the car look like. And it was just smashed all over. I mean, it looked like something out of a movie or a demolition derby. That huge trucks must have just gone over it, and there was blood everywhere. And I remember thinking that my airbag never went off, but it did. It was just, you could see that it had been punctured by the glass, and the glass everywhere. So much stuff was broken. And when I went there to pick up the items, the owner of the towing place, he started to say something like, "I'm really sorry for your loss." And I said, "Oh, what are you talking about?" And he said, "Well, I'm sorry, the driver didn't make it." And I said, "No, I was the driver." And he looked stunned, and he said, "What? Are you serious?" And he said in more than 20 years, he had never seen somebody survive an accident that bad. And he actually ended up giving me some gifts, and he just said, "You know, there were angels protecting you. God sent you angels, and you have a huge reason to be here. He has a big mission." And so
wow.
I was completely...
Interesting. Yeah, interesting that he would say that to somebody that he didn't otherwise know. And so that begs the question, at the time, prior to the accident, and then, what was your faith like, your relationship with God? Where was it at, and what were your emotions, in that recovery? Were you feeling more of a distant relationship, or were you angry? What were some of those emotions?
See, well, I definitely felt like I was just heartbroken over all that loss, but thankfully, by God's grace, I didn't feel angry. I'm grateful for that. That can be a natural response, but I also felt like it had been my fault, that I was distracted while I was driving and upset, and I should have been more careful. So I didn't think anything of it. If anything, I kept thinking, wow, why did God spare me? I feel like I didn't deserve it. I wasn't worthy. So even though I felt heartbroken over the loss of so many physical abilities, being super out of shape, losing so many things that I enjoyed and loved, and wondering if I'd ever get it back, I thought it was actually gone forever. I got to a point where I thought it was impossible and didn't think I would ever get back there. So I felt heartbroken, but actually in that brokenness, I felt closer to God than ever. I felt like our bond was kind of forged in the fire, that I needed to lean on God and His understanding more than ever, that I needed to find joy and contentment no matter my circumstance. So whether or not I could work out or play sports again, I needed to have that joy, because joy would come through knowing Jesus and having a relationship and nothing else, because all those other things are just fleeting. There's a song, the Lord gives and the Lord takes away, but blessed be the name. And so I just felt like it helped me cultivate a much better relationship. I started memorizing scripture a lot more, listening definitely to a lot more Christian music. I had been going to Christian clubs at school, but that also increased. I felt more isolated from, I guess, friends. So this friendship with God just became more crucial. So I felt like it propelled me to a level of faith that I was going to need, not only for the journey back to my goals and where I wanted to be, but also that helped me handle my twin sister's cancer diagnosis, and then later my mom, and taking care of them. So that was huge.
Yeah, for sure. So what was the turning point then in that recovery process? Obviously, you were kind of overwhelmed with where you were at physically, and that's where we kind of get stuck a lot of times, right? We get stuck in our physical self, and especially when you're somebody that was used to, being physically active was a huge part of your life prior to this. So what was that turning point where you started to kind of take charge of things and kind of get back at it and really make that switch mentally to say, you know what, let me start taking some small steps here.
Well, I definitely had support from my twin sister Jess and from Matt when they believed in me. But you know how there's the saying, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink? It wasn't until I felt like I was so uncomfortable and so unhappy and dissatisfied that I couldn't do anything else but give it 150% to get back to where I was. I heard someone say that with motivation, people are motivated more by getting away from something that's uncomfortable than going towards something they want. And I was really, really uncomfortable and felt pretty unhappy. I felt content with God, but unhappy with kind of who I was, what I was doing, where I was going. And so I couldn't live like that anymore. And after a ton of prayer and God's grace for getting through all of that, I decided to get a gym membership. Now, playing sports, we did some workouts, but they didn't really teach you necessarily proper ways to work out, how to be fit, how to burn fat, all of that stuff, how to eat well. And they just mainly focused on make sure you eat enough. Well, I was eating plenty, too much at that time. So I got a membership, and I remember being really intimidated. I didn't know any of the names of the exercises. I didn't know what I was doing. And then I decided that I would work with some trainers. I worked with a few different personal trainers, and the experience was incredible. I had some that were not so good, some okay, and some that were phenomenal, life-changing. And then I started studying everything I could on all things health and fitness and nutrition. I read tons of books. And Matt encouraged me to get a job at the vitamin shop. And I thought, well, how can I work there? I don't know a whole lot about vitamins and that kind of thing. And he said, I bet they'll teach you. If you go in